So chapter 20 covers transfer of title, title meaning ownership. And how is that done? Well, in this chapter, we're going to describe the four methods of title transfer and explain the process of transfer of title of a deceased person's property. So title to real estate just means ownership of the land, because title is just another word that means ownership. And alienation is a transfer of ownership or transfer of property. But in this instance, we're looking at alienation as the transfer of the ownership to that parcel of real estate. And this could be done during one's lifetime or after their death. And it could be done voluntarily or involuntarily. So we have voluntary or involuntary alienation while you're alive or after you die. At the time of death, you could voluntarily alienate your property through a will, or involuntarily if no will was left, because you're not the one who gets to decide who gets it. It has to go through the process of escheat, if no heirs can be located. So let's do the highlights, as always. Don't wait for me to tell you to do that. And let me know when you got that done.
Got it.
Everybody good?
Good.
So voluntary alienation of title can be by gift. You could gift the property away, you could sell it, you could exchange it. Owners use some form of deed to convey their ownership during their lifetime, or to convey that ownership, during their lifetime, or by will after their death. Transfer of ownership to or from the government is done by dedication. That's when you give land to the government for a greater public use, for streets, schools, parks. You often see developers do this with subdivisions. They subdivide their land. They don't need to keep maintaining those streets after they sell off the properties on there. So they'll dedicate the streets, for example, or any park areas to the government, and then they have to maintain them. The public grant is how an individual gets land from the government. The government will grant the public property to the by grant to the person they're giving it to. So dedication is when you give land to the government for public use, such as streets, schools, and parks. That one you'll probably get on exams. Public grant, you probably won't, but that's when the government gives you land. So let's do some highlights here about voluntary alienation, involuntary alienation, escheat, and we're also going to learn about something here called a partition. A partition is a court proceeding where one co-owner seeks to force another to sell or divide the property. And because they're being forced to, that is a form of involuntary alienation. Once again, just waiting on you guys. Let me know when you're done.
Got it. Done.
Got it.
Got it.
Okay. So involuntary alienation, again, is a transfer without the owner's consent. And this can be done through the process known as escheat. Escheat is if you die and you did not have a will. It's the process of escheat determines who gets your belongings when you died without a will. We're going to go over that process because if no heirs, no natural heirs can be located, then the state gets your property. They sell it at auction, and they keep the funds out there for a year so that family members can claim it. If nobody steps forward, then the state keeps it. So another reason why to have a will. Eminent domain, this is a power of state governments and other quasi-governmental authorities, public land clearance commissions, public housing authorities, utility companies. They all have the power of eminent domain to take someone's property if it's needed for the greater public good. But they're taking it, so therefore it's involuntary. Now they do pay you for it though. Unpaid debts. You don't pay your mortgage. You don't pay your taxes. You don't pay your loans. You can get foreclosed upon. So the property is being taken from you, so that it's involuntary. Or through adverse possession, somebody squatting on your property or using your property without your permission when you do nothing to remove them. And they take you to court because they're there long enough, they could claim ownership of the property. This is known as adverse possession, or an easement by prescription, which must be perfected with a lawsuit for adverse possession, also known as a suit to quiet title. Some people call it squatters' rights, even though squatters have no rights, especially since we've been seeing this in the news a lot lately with all the illegal immigration and crime running rampant because district attorneys don't want to enforce the laws. We're seeing people breaking into houses right in front of the owner. They call the cops, and then the cops kick the owner out of there because they're like, well, this person's in possession of it, so you got to go evict them, you know. Well, you've seen this happen several times, quite a few times in New York recently. And it was so bad over there. You know, what was it? You even had a couple murdered a lady that came back to her house. Remember, they put her in a bag or something like that, but they tracked them down. And either way, there were squatters that were living in her house. So that was some surprise to her, and then they killed her. But then you have other people that they blatantly break into the window, get into the house, and then they're telling the owner that they got rights. The owner calls the cops, and cops come, and then they arrest the owner because the owner refuses to leave. Go figure. What the hell is that about? That's some screwed up laws there. But because of enough action and videos going viral online and stuff about this and in the news, the politicians are forced to take some action there in New York. So they made it harder for somebody to claim adverse possession. They made some changes as far as squatting goes, that squatters don't have rights and can't claim adverse possession. Adverse possession is specifically, I guess, when people are using the property, not necessarily squatting on your property, but using your property. Like if you have farmland, this is what it's really intended for, things of that nature. And you're not sure where the property line is, so you've been using some of the property over the line. That doesn't make you a squatter. Squatters are those ones that break into your house to try to, take control over it. So let's see how New York wrote those laws or those rules. I have no idea. New Jersey is quite similar too with some of them. So people can, you go on vacation, you come back, you got somebody living in your house, that could be a problem. You may have to evict them. All right, now erosion, even though those people don't have the right to claim adverse possession yet, because you got to be there in New Jersey for at least 30 years, so I don't know. I don't know what the deal with that is. But erosion is a decrease in land because it's wearing away of the land by wind or water. So that's a form of involuntary alienation by Mother Nature, right? Mother Nature is wearing away your property and taking it from you. All right, so let's go over this easement by prescription a little bit further, also known as adverse possession. Some people call it squatters' rights, but different, a little bit different in the application. When you use someone else's property for a period of time as defined by state law or as prescribed by state law, that's why they got an easement by prescription. The prescribed, when you've been using the land for a prescribed period of time, you can claim ownership of that property. Now, to perfect that easement by prescription, it requires a court action called a suit for adverse possession or a suit to quiet title. You're asking the judge to quiet the rumblings of any claims of ownership. So that's thus the quiet title part. The use must be continuous, hostile, adverse to the owner's title, exclusive, and without the owner's approval. Additionally, the use must be visible, open, and notorious. So you need to understand this part here because if one of these conditions don't apply, you can't claim an easement by prescription. So you need to know how to get out of or how to cancel an easement by prescription or what wouldn't qualify for an easement by prescription. They give you some kind of a question on exam about that. So that use must be continuous, hostile, adverse to the owner's title, exclusive, and without the owner's approval. Additionally, the use has to be visible, open, and notorious. So if you're using somebody's property, they gave you permission to, you can't claim ownership on it later. Now, the prescriptive period in New Jersey is 30 years for improved land and 60 years for unimproved woodlands or wetlands. Now, this law is going to be changed at some time in the future to 20 years, the common law period. However, New Jersey politicians have been working on that for 14 years now. That's as long as I've been following it, 14 years, and they still have not cured the conflict in the law. Because right now there's a law for 30 years, for 60 years, and for 20 years on the books. So they're going to do away with the 30 and 60 years and go with the 20-year common law period, because they made too many laws to cover the same topic. But until that gets done, nobody's going to successfully claim adverse possession here in New Jersey. Now, through the process of tacking, successors in interest, they call this tacking. Successors in interest, like a landlord and a tenant or an ancestor and an heir or a buyer and seller, can add one person's time of possession to another's, combining them to reach the prescriptive period if they weren't there for that entire 30 years per se. So how could you stop an easement by prescription? Well, an owner can take legal action against any adverse possessor and get them removed from your land. They could cut their access off, stopping that continuous use, and that resets the time clock of the prescriptive period. Or you could give them permission. I'll give you permission to be there till the end of the month. By giving you permission, they can't claim an easement by prescription. That kind of resets that time clock as well. So an easement by prescription cannot be claimed against public land, only against privately owned properties. All right. Now we're going to go over this again in chapter 7, but if you guys want, snap a picture away at this. You know, this is a pretty good note I have here. Otherwise, the book is kind of wonky. This is a little more better of a description.
Got it.
And this is what you're going to have in the book. So you could highlight this, and make these notes. Because, well, actually in chapter 6, we're going to go over it, not chapter 7, on page 110, 111. So you guys take that and highlight that. And I'm just going to grab a call real quick. Okay. Now, one interesting thing at the bottom of this slide here is this part. You don't need to know this for exams, but it is interesting to know. And I've actually used this to give some people advice on this. Actually, talking to a mayor in a town, I gave a mayor advice. The property owners who feel that the government is making too many rules and laws that could restrict how an owner can use their own property. They're basically condemning your property through something that's known as inverse condemnation, because they put so many rules in effect that you can't really use it. So they're really rendering your property worthless, or they're devaluing it because of those restrictions that they keep putting on it. So that burden that's put on the owners by the government, that property owner can go after the government for what's known as inverse condemnation. They're basically devaluing their property without any compensation, so they could get the government to actually pay them. So that's something that the government has to be careful about too, if a property owner knows their rights anyway. Interesting little thing there. All right. And then, okay, so this is when we go back to chapter 6. You don't need to go there and highlight this and put these notes quite yet. When we get to chapter 6, you'll see this slide again that will have these highlights on it. So this is on page 110 and 111. And it talks about some of these things as well, the easement by prescription, legal action, to get the property, tacking, what tacking is, and sue for possession and quiet title. See over here in chapter 20, it talks about that 30-year and 60-year period. But in chapter 20 or chapter 6, they say New Jersey's law is silent to the required number of years, although court cases appear to support a minimum of 30 years adverse use. Actually, this person's lost that wrote this book, because it's been in limbo for so long. I guess that maybe it's different writers, same writer, I don't know. They lost track, or they just don't know the law here. I did some research on this, and I found that, like I said, I've been following this thing. It's been like 14 years now that the New Jersey politicians have been sitting on this, knowing what they want to do. They ratified a law, or they put the law documents in place, but they're just not voting on it to put it to fix the problem. I don't know why. It's interesting.
One question, Victor.
Yeah.
Here we're talking about, let's take an example of the previous page on chapter 20.
Okay, so what do you need to know for exam? Is that what you're getting at?
No. So
Okay.
the 30 years we're talking about, right? So
Yeah.
what exactly does it mean? The continuous 30 years of use by the squatter?
Okay, so that's for improved lands. Like, so if you go to my slide here, 30 years for improved lands, that means there's, what is an improvement? It's any manufactured addition that's added to the property. It could be a driveway, doesn't necessarily need to be a house on it, but it could be a house, a sewer pipe, a driveway poured on there. That makes it's no longer just raw land, because raw unimproved property land, it's 60 years. But if there's an improvement on it, like a house or a structure, it's 30 years in order for you to claim ownership of it.
So the person can live in there for 30 years. Is that what it means?
No, that means that they have to live in there for 30 years before they can claim ownership.
Oh, okay. Got it. And you're saying to cut the access, it will reset the 30 years, so they cannot claim the access? So they cannot claim.
We didn't discuss anything about taxes. We just said somebody's on your property or using your property for that longer period of time.
Okay.
You could see how that could be problematic too. I mean, how could somebody be
Yes.
doing that for that long too, But these are the requirements in order for them to claim the ownership.
Okay.
So an easement by prescription, let's see, this is, okay, so these are the ones from chapter 6, page 110 and page 111. We'll highlight them later. Okay, title is a word that means ownership. There's no document in real estate called title. It's just a word that means ownership. Now, we could do title searches and then you get title work, paperwork, but there's no single document that proves your ownership called title. Okay. You could hire somebody to do a title search and search the public records, and that's a little bit different. Now, a deed is the document that we use to transfer one's title, their ownership, or partial ownership, or even their rights. So a deed is a document to transfer ownership or title during a person's lifetime. The will, your last will and testament, is a document used to transfer one's property after their death. You could decide who gets your property when you die. You could leave it to your relatives or a friend or a charity or whoever you want. But when you do that, that's voluntarily. When you don't decide who gets it after you die, well, that's involuntary, right? So transfer of title by will is known as devise. Testate means that you prepared a will, stating how you'd like to dispose of your property after your death. And remember that your will has no power until after you die. So when you're alive, you transfer property by deed, and you could still sell that property even when you're alive, even though you may have written in a will that someone else is going to get it. Hey, if you sold it while you're alive, when you die, if you didn't update your will, the person's not going to get anything, right? Because you no longer have it. You sold it while you were still alive. Even though you wrote in a will that they would get the property, they're not going to get it because you sold it already. So you should update your will periodically too, because life happens, things change. Transfer of title by descent takes effect only when you die. So, and you die without a will. Intestate, they call that. Transfer of property by descent is an involuntary action because you don't get to decide who gets your stuff. It goes according to the law who can claim it. And you should consult an attorney before making a will and all that, blah, blah, blah. But really, you can, if you don't have a will, better than nothing, grab a piece of paper, a pen and a paper, and handwrite it. Don't type it and print it. That's different. If the entire document is handwritten, that's called a holographic will, and it is valid and legal as a will here in New Jersey. Just make sure you have all the information down. I got one that I hand wrote, and I never went to an attorney. I just hand wrote it. I just, this is my last will and testament. Make sure that you name an executor or an executrix. Make sure that you, you date it. Make sure that you put your name. I put my name and social security and birth date and all that on mine. Make sure, you try to cover all of your assets. Okay. And then any of them that aren't stated, still state who would get that, anything that's not stated in there, in case you missed something. Okay, so intestate means without having left a will. Testate means you did prepare a will. That's on page 373. This is towards the bottom of the page under transfer of the deceased person's property. Intestate, you didn't have a will, you died without a will. Testate, you prepared a will. So legally, when a person dies, their estate immediately passes to their heirs by descent or to a person named in a will. However, the will must be probated and all claims against the estate must be satisfied. In other words, all debts need to be paid. They're concentrating mainly there on the taxes. But yeah, anybody else that's owed money by you when you died could make a claim against your estate. So probate or administration is the legal process by which a court determines who inherits the property of a deceased person and what the assets of the estate are. So you would have, if you had a will, you would have named an executor or an executrix to manage your will to ensure that all your assets are distributed according to your last wishes. If you didn't name anybody in the will, a judge will assign an administrator, probably an attorney appointed by the court to do that job. Once again, here's the same slide that we saw way back in chapter 5, where I had a bunch of death terms, because that's where we, in chapter 5, that's where we were talking about some of these things. And then after chapter 5, we skipped here to this chapter. Then we're going to go to back to chapter 6. I like to do it in this order because there's a lot of things here that are discussed in the chapters in between within the book. So just to recap once again, an heir, I guess the H is silent. It's not hair. That would be a rabbit. It's an heir. It's a natural blood relative who can inherit belongings of a relative who died. And they can make claims of rights to their assets. Devise is a transfer or leave property by will upon death. You're doing that in your last will and testament. The devisor is the one who wrote that will, the one who's leaving that property by a will. And a devisee is the one who's receiving it. So the word devise is a transfer of property by will. If you put OR at the end of that, that's the person who's giving whatever the root word is. They're leaving property by will. And you put EE at the end of that word, and that's the person who's receiving whatever the root word is, devise. All right? Little way to know legal terminology here.
I'm so sorry. Do you think you can repeat that again? I'm
Sure.
so sorry.
Sure. Look, when we get to chapter 7, I'm going to have a whole list where you could see this, and we're going to go over that in a little more detail because it applies to a lot more terms too. So in this example, devise. What is devise? It's a transfer of property by will. And if you take that word devise and you put OR at the end of it, this is how you could understand legal terminology. OR at the end of the word is whoever is giving whatever the root word is. So the root word is devise. That's their property that they're leaving by will. So the devisor is the one who's giving that property. They're the one who wrote the will. And if the word ends in EE, you see the letters EE, devisee, that's the person who's receiving whatever the root word is. And they're receiving that property that's left by will. Got it?
Yes, thank you so much.
Sure. You'll see a whole chart of this in chapter 7, and we'll go over it. Actually, I may even have that chart in this chapter just to flash it to you really quick. But to take notes and stuff on it, we'll do it when we get to the chapter, and I'll have that slide there as well again. So demise should not be confused with devise, because devise is a transfer of property by will upon death. And this is not a death term, but I put it here because so many people mix up demise and devise. It's one letter difference there, right? Demise, devise, and people get confused with it. But demise is a transfer of property by lease. So demise is not to be confused with devise, is a transfer of property by lease. Okay. I should reword that a little bit. Change that. It's kind of written wonky. So I'll do this. Is a transfer of property by lease, not a death term. Comma, not to be confused with devise. That's probably the right way to have it in there. And then I could take these death terms and put them in chapter 5 where they belong. Let me copy that. Okay. Now, testate means that you died with a will. Intestate means you died without a will. Testator is a man who makes a will. Testatrix is a female who made a will. Probate is what we call that court proceeding that determines what the assets of the estate are and who the natural heirs are, or who the devisees are, who you're leaving, who you named somebody in a will to get something. An executor, probate is we just went over that. Executor is a man, executrix is a female, who's a trusted person that you named in the will to make sure that your last wishes are carried out according to the will. And if you didn't name somebody to be an executor or executrix, the court will appoint an administrator to handle those duties. Descent and distribution is the law that every state has that determines who gets your stuff when you die without a will. Intestate, we call that. And if you die intestate and no natural heirs can be located, see, the only person that can lay claim to any of your belongings if you died without a will are your blood relatives. Okay. Escheat is if you die intestate and no heirs can be located. The property reverts back to the state. The state will sell the property at auction, and those monies will be held in a fund for 1 year, in which time any heirs can claim it. And if nobody steps forward to claim it, the agency will get the money. Or the state will get the money. Sorry. Legacy is your personal property that you've amassed during your lifetime, and bequest are your wishes. I bequeath to thee my vast fortune of $4 in my bank accounts, Hopefully you have more of a legacy than that, or maybe not. Maybe you did generate a large legacy while you were alive and you can't take it with you, so you spent it and you timed it right. You died and you still had $4 to your name, right? Okay. Dower and courtesy rights. Okay, so these are specific New Jersey rights for people who live in New Jersey. Dowers begins with a doe, and a doe is a deer, a female deer. Remember that song? Doe is a deer, a female deer. Courtesy, because men should be courteous to women, is the male's right. So dower is the wife's right. Courtesy is the husband's right. It's an ancient right in which a wife has certain interest upon her husband's death in any real estate that he owned during their marriage. Courtesy is a similar right that the husband has in any property that his wife owned during their marriage. And New Jersey abolished the creation of any new dower and courtesy rights as of May 28th, 1980. Another date to know. Marriages after this date, your spouse only has the right of interest in the primary marital residences. Any other properties that you owned, your spouse doesn't have the right to lay claim to them.
Unless they are not a joint owner, right?
Unless they're a joint owner or they put any money towards it.
Okay.
Because, in lawsuits, when people get divorced and stuff, how they can lay claim, oh, well, I have a right to that. They used some of my money to pay the taxes or to do an improvement or to do something. So then you could make a claim. So this is how your spouses would make a claim of interest when people are getting divorced. The that's my property. I own that. You didn't put any money towards it. Oh, really? Remember you borrowed $10 from me once to go to Home Depot for spackle to put on the wall, whatever it was. Hey, now if you could prove that you put money towards that property, you could lay claim to it. It's as simple as that. This is why when people get divorced, they're able to lay claim. Then, because usually when I get to this point, I've had people in my class before say, "That's bullshit. I got divorced and she got half of everything." Well, that's how she had to get a lawyer. You know how to counter that? Get a prenup. Guys, you need a prenup. Actually, everybody needs a prenup, but especially guys, because guys tend to lose out on divorce settlements. And that's why I say a lot of times these days, the juice ain't worth the squeeze to get married for if you're a guy. There's no benefit in it for you that signing that legal document. It's one thing to do it in church, for the religious services, but legally, it just, hey, if the relationship goes sour, you lose half your stuff. So that's why in these modern days, it makes sense to have a prenuptial agreement if you're going to get married. Get a good prenup, and if she don't want to sign it, things that make you go, Anyway, missing money. Missingmoney.com and the unclaimedproperty.nj.gov. Did anybody go there and check their name and search their names at all when I gave you these links once before? Do you guys search at all? See if your names were on that list?
No.
Even though you didn't think that your name may be on that list? Take a look. Your name, or maybe one of your relatives' names are on there, and you could claim, you may be able to make a claim to some of those assets. It's not just if somebody died without a will, and then the state sold the property and then they're holding on to the money there. It could be other things. Before my dad died, when he was still alive, he had he bought a savings CD. It was like a 5-year CD. He had to wait for it to mature. So he bought the savings CD, and after he bought it, that same year, they tore down that bank branch in my town, which was a couple of blocks from our house. They tore down the building. The bank was sold, and they tore down the building. But he still needed to wait for the thing to mature before he could claim it. But 5 years later, I guess out of sight, out of mind, he forgot about it. And I was teaching these classes, and I seen his name on there. I was like, oh, let me go there, and I looked up a little info in there, and he made the claim and went and he got his money. So he was owed, they had thousands of dollars for CD that he did an investment on. So you never know. Just check, guys. It could be for anything. I had one girl in my class that she checked one time. She was owed money from her last job at the mall. You would think that her boss would have reached out to her to come get her last check, or that he would have sent it to her house. But no, instead he was being a jerk. Instead, he sent it to the state. It was in this missing money when New Jersey was still enrolled in and using that site. Other states use missing money. New Jersey now, they separated. They have their own page. But search both of them for family members and your name. You never know, guys. It's missing money. That's why they call it missing money. You never know. Or unclaimed property. You may have money coming your way. And if you find any and you feel generous because I'm the one who showed it and introduced it to you, I'll be more than happy to take your donations. All right. Moving along. Transfer of title by will. Last will and testament is the instrument made by an owner to voluntarily convey title to that property after they die. And the person who makes a will is known as testator, or if you're a female, you're a testatrix. Yes, these are genderized terms in Latin, rooted in Latin. The gift of real property by will is known as devise. And let's see. How about this one? In New Jersey, children can be disinherited. So be good to your parents, but not just for that reason, hoping they give you something. But a surviving spouse is entitled to at least 1/3 of the estate. And a determination of that augmented estate is a complex calculation. In a case where a will does not provide the minimum statutory inheritance, the surviving spouse has the option of informing the court that they're going to take the statutory share rather than any lesser share that was left to them by their spouse. This practice is known as the right of election, and it is reserved only to a surviving spouse. So, can your spouse write you out of the will?
They can write you out of the will, but you have a right to a portion just based on this.
You're sharp. You got what I was saying. Yep. Sure, they could write you out of the will, but you don't have to sit there and take it. You could be like, nah, the law says that I have the right of election, so I'm entitled to at least 1/3 of everything. So yeah, I'll take that instead. All right. So now a will differs from a deed in that a deed can, by the way, right of election, you don't need to know that for exam. They're not going to test you on that. But testator, testatrix, devise, devisee, devisor, probate, you need to know those terms. All right. And you need to also understand that a will differs from a deed in that a deed conveys your ownership interest while you're alive, and a will does not take effect until after you die. And to be valid, a deed must be delivered during the lifetime of the grantor, the one who made the deed, the one who's giving the property. Okay. You need to deliver your deed while you're alive. If you don't, it's not said that there was the transfer, because when does the transfer of ownership take place? Upon delivery and acceptance of the deed itself. So you don't just fill out the deed, you also have to deliver it, and the buyer or the person who you're giving it to has to accept it. And if that didn't take place, that delivery and acceptance part didn't take place, the transfer of ownership didn't take place. All right, so as you can see on the left-hand side of this slide, I have a little notation there about how in what's it, chapter 6 or chapter 7, wherever page 120 is there, we're going to be going over that understanding legal terminology, the words that end in OR versus EE that I spoke about a couple slides ago. We're going to go over that chart in a moment, but here's what it looks like on that page. Okay, that's going to be in chapter 7. So basically you could see you look at the root word, which is the product, what's going on here. And then the person who's giving that product is basically the same word with an OR at the end of it, or an EE. OR is the person who's giving whatever the root word is, the product. And the words that end in EE is the one who's receiving the product or whatever the root word is. So devise means what? What is devise?
It's a gift of property.
So it's when you're leaving property to somebody by a will. So devisor is the one who made the will and is giving you that property, and devisee is the one who is named in the will to receive it. Grant is when you sell or give away the property, you're granting your ownership to someone. So the grantor is the one who's giving it, the grantee is the one who's receiving that property. Legacy is your personal property that you've amassed during your lifetime, and the legator is the one who's giving that property, and the legatee is the one that's receiving it. A lease is where an owner intentionally transfers possession of their property to a tenant for a limited period of time as defined in the lease. They're also transferring all their rights in that property for a limited period of time as defined in that lease, with the exception of the right to sell the property, of course. Now, mortgage is one that a lot of people misunderstand. and they don't really know what the term means. A mortgage is actually a promise to pay. It's not a loan. A mortgage loan is a loan. A mortgage is just a promise to pay. And banks don't make promises, they make loans. So it is the borrower who is the mortgagor. They're giving their promise to the bank in exchange for the bank giving them a loan, the bank or lender. So that's why I wrote next to mortgagor, borrower, and next to mortgagee, lender. So a lot of people misinterpret this one, they get it wrong. So you could either just remember when it comes to mortgage, mortgagor, it's probably the opposite of what you think it is. Unless you remember the whole story behind it, that a mortgage is a promise to pay. Banks don't make promises, they make loans. So it's the borrower who's making the promise to the bank that they're going to pay them back according to their agreed upon terms. And in exchange, the lender is going to give them a loan. All right, you guys get the gist of this now. We'll visit that again in chapter 7. All right, so what are the legal requirements for making a will? Well, a person must be of legal age and sound mind when they execute the will. The drawing of the will must be a voluntary act free of any undue influence by other people. Any person of sound mind who's 18 years of age or older can make a will devising their real property, and all wills must be in writing to be valid. The general rule is that a will must be witnessed by 2 persons. Okay, so let's back up. All wills must be in writing. That means it could be typed as well. It just needs to be on paper. Video wills or audio recorded wills, they're not valid wills. They're not enforceable. It has to be in writing. And the general rule is that you got to have 2 witnesses sign that will as well. Somebody who serves as a beneficiary in the will can serve as a witness in New Jersey. And if the signatures of the witnesses are notarized within 2 days, the probate proceedings can be simplified. Holographic will is one where the entire will is completely handwritten. Like I was telling you guys before, if you handwrite, sit there, grab a piece of paper, just write down a will, that is considered a valid will here in New Jersey. And it has to be signed and dated by the testator, the person making the will. And under New Jersey estate planning law, holographic wills can be probated and will serve to ensure that the testator's assets are bequeathed according to the testator's wishes. For real property acquired by a married deceased person before May 28, 1980, the surviving spouse is still entitled to a life estate of 1/2 interest in all real estate owned by that deceased, no matter what other provisions were made for in the will. So even if your spouse wrote you out of the will, okay, remember, if you're married before May 28, 1980, what happened on May 28, 1980?
The spouse can claim can put a claim on the property. Doesn't matter what.
What kind of claim? What are you talking about?
Ownership claim.
There's a name. If you have rights to your spouse's property, it's called something. If you're a man or if you're a woman, there's a different name for it.
Yes.
A dower, courtesy.
Dower or courtesy rights, correct.
Yes.
And the way to, so you need to know that. It will be on exams. You need to know dower and courtesy, and you need to know which one is the man's right and which one is the wife's right. And then you need to know the date that New Jersey abolished the creation of any new dower or courtesy rights, but any ones that were made before this date are still valid and in existence. It's just that they abolished the creation of any new ones. So if you were married before May 28, 1980, you still have dower and courtesy rights. So the way to remember that dower is the wife's right is because it begins with a doe. And a doe is a deer, a female deer. So that's the wife's right. And courtesy, because men should be courteous to women, is the husband's right. That's the way I look at it, and that's how I remember it. Works for me anyway. Okay. So dower and courtesy rights, you're entitled to half interest in all the real estate owned. Okay. If this was after May 28, 1980, you have the right of election, right? 1/3 of the estate. Transfer of title by descent. Let's see how that works. Descent and distribution. Sorry, got to get a sip of my go-go juice coffee here. Let's see. So title to real estate and personal property of a person who dies intestate passes to their heirs. Under the descent statutes, the primary heirs of the deceased are their spouse, civil partner, or domestic partner, and close blood relatives. When children have been legally adopted, most states consider them to be heirs of the adopting parents, but not heirs of the ancestors of the adopting parents. So if you were adopted, you cannot lay claim to your aunt and uncle's assets because you're not truly a blood relative. Now, can they leave you something in a will? Yes. But can you claim if they didn't have a will, can you lay claim to their assets? No, because you're not a blood relative. This is the way the law is written. In most states, illegitimate children. Okay, what's an illegitimate child? It is one where your parents were not married when you were born. So in most, or let's look at it this way, in Game of Thrones, terminology, you are the bastard child. Okay, a lot of people understand that. Now, in most states, illegitimate children inherit from the mother, but they do not inherit from their father. What? Unless he admitted being your parent in writing, or parentage has been legally established in another way, like a blood test or paternity test, or he signed your, if he signed your birth certificate, he admitted it in writing. Now, if he legally adopts his real child, which is kind of crazy, that child inherits as an adopted child would from the father, but not his side of the family, which is so weird because you are a blood relative. So what's the deal with that? Well, check your politicians, have them change the law if you don't like it. Intestate real property is distributed according to the laws of the state in which the property is located. The New Jersey law of descent and distribution provides that real property belonging to an individual who has died intestate is distributed in the following order. The law and the estate discussed apply only to what remains of the estate after all payments of debts have been satisfied. So the law of descent, once again, comes only into effect when the descendant leaves no will. A surviving spouse or partner become the sole heir if there were no parents or children. If there is a child or children who are also children of the surviving spouse, the spouse or partner receives the first $50,000 plus half the estate. The rest goes to the children. If the descendant leaves parents and a spouse but no children, the spouse or partner receives the first $50,000 plus half the estate. The rest goes to the parents. If there are children who are not children of the surviving spouse, now things start getting a little sticky. Well, the spouse or partner receives half the estate and the child or children the other. And when no spouse or partner survives, children become the sole natural heirs. Where there's neither a surviving spouse or children's own heirs, the estate goes first to the parents, and failing that, to brothers and sisters or their heirs. And in default of any other natural heir, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and first cousins may be considered heirs. Beyond that point, the entire estate goes to the state of New Jersey by a escheat. So how does this escheat work? Well, the state treasurer sells the property at a public sale, giving notice by publicizing it in a newspaper in Trenton and in a local newspaper in the county where the property is located. The proceeds of that sale are held in a fund for 1 year. And if nobody steps forward to make the claim, the state takes the money. That's why I told you guys, go to that missingmoney.com or unclaimedproperty.nj.gov for New Jersey. Check it out. I'm telling you, I always have at least one person in each class that they do find money. It is crazy. You would not believe. If you find anything, please share it with the class. No, you don't have to pay me any finder's fees or anything, so don't worry about that. Just, you know, nice to see when people are getting saved money there. Okay, and that concludes chapter 20. There you go. So, we're going to do the key terms now. All right, let's do the key terms to review chapter 20. It's before we get started in it, go to letter L on the right-hand side of page 376. And after it says one who can inherit, write blood relative after that. One who can inherit, write blood relative. All right, let's get started. Person named by the state to administer a descendant's will.
Executor.
Administrator.
Administrator is one that's named by the court when you did not name somebody in your will. One is A. Court proceeding to establish validity of a will.
Probate.
Probate, 10 is B. Title acquired by usage.
Adverse possession.
Yeah, when you've been using somebody's property for a period of time as prescribed by state law, 30 years or 60 years or 2B 20 years, you can make that claim. That would be adverse possession. 2 is C. Person named in a will to administer a descendant's estate.
Devotee.
The
Executor.
hold on. 5 is D, executor, and put there / executrix next to executor, because executor is a man and executrix would be a female. So EXECUTRIX, executrix. EXECUTRIX. 5 is D. A transfer of title without the grantor's consent.
Involuntary alienation.
Involuntary alienation. 8 is E. What do you call it when you don't have a will?
Intestate.
Intestate. 7 is F. What do you call the person who makes a will?
Testate.
Not testate.
Oh, the testator.
Testator. 12 is G. Document disposing of a property after one's death. Actually, you know what? Before we get to do that, next to testator, put a / and write testatrix. Test A TRX. That's how you spell it. Test, the letter A, TRX. Testatrix. That would be a female. So testator is a male who makes a will. Testatrix is a female who makes a will. So that 12 was G. Document disposing of property after one's death. What document do you make that dictates how you're disposing of your property after you die?
Last will and testament.
Yep, 9 is H. If you made a will, that's called?
Testate.
Now, 11 is I. Acquiring property by natural heirs.
Descent.
Descent. That's the descent and distribution is the set of laws that say how your assets will be distributed, right? Descent. So 3 is J. One who receives real property through a will.
Devisee.
Devisee.
A devisee, 4 is K. One who can inherit, a blood relative.
An heir.
An heir, 6 is L. Although an adopted child can also inherit from their adopted parents, but not their extended family. Transfer of title with the grantor's consent.
Voluntary alienation.
Voluntary alienation, correct. 13 is M, and that concludes chapter 20.